Hey there, I'm Jackie Ferris. This week on the 302, we are checking out figurines that tell stories of religious figures and figures in literature. It's a beautiful collection at Winterthur, and we're going to take a deep dive. Get ready, the 302 is headed your way. So Leslie, the last time I was here, you taught me the word chinoiserie.
Yes, that's right.
That really was amazing. It was a great show. Now, this show, hey everybody, is about Staffordshire collectibles, right?
Yes, it is.
Now, I want everybody to know who you are. This is Leslie Grigsby. She is the curator of ceramics and glass here at Winterthur. Leslie, thank you, as always, for letting us come in and look at some of the collection.
I'm thrilled that you were able to come back.
So let's talk a little bit about, just this enormous collection that you have and the research that goes into it. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Sure. Well, we have many different types of ceramics and glass here, and the particular group that we're near are some figures that came from Staffordshire. They range from the 1700s and 1800s, pretty much. In this particular case, I'm very proud of. I wish I could take credit for it, but my colleague Lauren Fair, who is one of our conservators, came to us and did some special research on all of the different colors that we see on the figures. Mm-hmm. And by her scientific work, we're able to learn all sorts of things, including the recipes for the colors, and in some cases that helps us to date the objects.
Now, you discovered the recipe for an orange, is that right?
Yes, the orange, Lauren was the first one to get that figured out, and also she found some special, unique aspects of these other colors that can help us even know what factory they were made in.
Now, this collection came from a private collector, or for the most part?
It did. It came from two people named the Bernards. They lived down in New Orleans, and Mrs. Bernard had begun collecting, her name was Pat, had begun collecting, I think, in the 1970s, and her husband got sort of interested in it, and they ended up with hundreds and hundreds of objects. So they offered us 500, and suggested that we consider selecting maybe about 200 of them to keep, which we were thrilled to do. We went a little over 200.
Sure.
But we're pleased with them.
So talk to us a little bit about what, it's not porcelain.
Right.
But what is it made out of?
It's made out of something that's usually called earthenware. Mm-hmm. You sort of get three big categories: earthenware, stoneware, and porcelain. Porcelain often was most expensive in the period, and it's fired at a really high temperature, so it sort of melts together and becomes kind of glassy. Mm-hmm. Earthenware, if people think a little more about what your flower pot mm-hmm. is made of, it's very porous, and so if you put water in it, the water will go through unless you put a glaze. These are all glazed earthenware.
Now, did these things come with certificates, or was it easy to research them and date them and tell the stories behind them?
Well, it varies a lot. Some are quite generic, but quite a few of the figures were representing specific historic characters, for example. And so you know that the story is not going to predate when that character lived. Mm-hmm. Some are references to famous stories like the plays of Shakespeare, mm-hmm. or Old Mother Hubbard. We have things like that, as well as things that are based on the Bible. Mm-hmm. So those will help us with when certain book illustrations were published, and these might copy a book illustration, mm-hmm. we'll research that as well.
So how do you care for something like this? Because being that they're earthenware, I would imagine there is a hazard that they might degrade in some way if not handled properly or stored in the right temperature.
Yeah, and the handling is the biggest danger for these. Happily, most ceramics most earthenware, stoneware, and porcelain don't really have a problem with temperature change as long as it's not really fast. Mm-hmm. So if you had a teapot and poured hot water into an earthenware teapot, that's pretty dangerous. It might crack. Mm-hmm. But if it's gradual and a room warms up, even if it gets as hot as the weather can be in this region sometimes, it's going to be all right. Light doesn't normally hurt them at all. but especially figures, they have arms and legs and fingers sticking out, and it's unusual to find ones that have no damage at all from time and just being dusted even.
So I know that you have a great restoration wing that, brings things back to life from, paintings to furniture, etc. Do you have a wing, or a unit of people, or is it just one person that, knows the kind of, glue to use if a finger does come off?
Yes, our objects lab, which have Lauren Fair, the woman I mentioned who did all the research, and Lara Kaplan. They're the folks who take care of our ceramics and our glass, and they also specialize in other types of sort of small objects, wooden boxes, or a wax portrait, metalwork. Those sorts of things are all handled by them, and they, as well as many of the other conservators here, train in a master's program with the University of Delaware. They train students, as we train students in a different specialty, yes.
Absolutely. Now, one thing I do want to ask before we go over and take a look at the big wall of figurines, so I want to talk to you about this figurine that we're standing in front of and the one next to it. Tell us a little bit about the history and why you chose this as your centerpiece for the exhibit.
Couple reasons. One is, how could you not love a figure that's that
beautiful.
large? She's a wonderful one. She would have been very difficult to make. Large figures are rare because they don't survive well when you put them in the kiln to fire them. They crack and they fall over and have problems. She would have been made as part of a set. She represents purity, and it was a set of virtues. So you would have chastity, purity, hope, various subjects like that. And she is a super high-end model that would have been made right around 1800 for a wealthy home.
Wow.
Much later in the century, you get figures like this kind of blobby-looking white figure. It's called a flat back because they were made to go on mantelpieces.
Okay.
And so you don't expect to see them in the round. She would have been a centerpiece in a room, and you would be walking around her. So she's finished on all sides. This is very plain on the back.
Is it a wedding or a king? Or?
This is the King and Queen of Sardinia. And so they were part of the royal family. They were related to Queen Victoria.
Okay.
And so everybody knew this and knew how all of the different nobility were related. So this would have been popular for someone who supported the monarchy in general.
And that's a common theme. Not only do you have books and plays, but the monarchy, there are all different kinds of these beautiful figurines. And when we come back, we're going to talk about them. We'll see you in a minute.
Hi, my name is Joe Barbella. I'm an artist/musician, and we love creativity on 302.
Welcome back. We're at Winterthur and we're talking about the Staffordshire exhibit. Now, Leslie, I got to tell you, I was really excited to learn that these things weren't just figurines. These were little status symbols in people's homes.
Absolutely. It's true. Unlike today where we buy different kinds of decorative items and sprinkle them around the house and they don't really have any specific meaning, in the 18th and 19th century, the objects that you put out said a lot about who you were and what your status was. You might want to show that you were a very pious person, and you might pick an object that portrays a biblical figure that you have great respect for. Or you might want to prove how aware you were of ancient languages and pick something that was referring to a story that was written, say, by a Greek or Roman writer.
Now, you mentioned religion. One of the sections is based on faith, and in the very middle is the Virgin Mary and the baby Jesus. I mean, it really is a stunning piece.
Thank you. Yes, that is a wonderful one, and it was, I believe that one was copying a book illustration in a Bible. I may be misremembering, but quite a few of these figures are. Sometimes they're copying famous sculptures also that were widely respected and had been reproduced.
Now, are you able to find out who a particular sculptor is for any of these pieces? Is there someone who is known in the field?
We sometimes can figure out who the original modeler is but factory records in Staffordshire, which is up in the Midlands in England, those records are often not that specific. A fellow named Ralph Wood, his figures were quite well known, and the workmen who were with him. But more often, we're able to know who made the original sculpture that was being copied.
Yeah.
So, for example, a famous man was John Cheer, who was down in London, and he was making stone sculptures and cast metal sculptures. And those, sometimes miniature plasters he would make, would be bought by different factories, and then they would make molds off of those or copy those and reproduce them.
I'm really just kind of intrigued by some of the stories that these figurines are telling. You have is it Samson or Daniel and the lion?
Yes, yeah, we do have one example that is showing just a figure, and he's in a tartan scarf, which is sort of funny, but Queen Victoria liked tartans, so everybody else started putting tartans on everything. But he's sort of wrestling with this lion, and it could be Samson with the lion, it could be Daniel in the lion's den, and it even could be Hercules with the Nemean lion. So they could market it in any of these different ways.
It is whatever you want it to be.
Yeah, you like religious stuff, here's a religious thing.
Absolutely.
You like classical stuff, here's a classical thing.
So another one are the two gentlemen that are being burned at the stake. What is that all about?
Yes, that's one of my favorite pieces in the whole Winterthur collection. And that's Ridley and Latimer, who were two bishops in England in the 1400s and 1500s. And they got burned at the stake because of their particular religious beliefs. They were Christian, and we can't imagine putting a figure of something with flames and
people
two very
killed.
pious-looking people tied to a stake. We can't think that we would want that. But at the time when this was being made in the 19th century, it showed these people were willing to die for their beliefs. So it would have been a very poignant and important message, not only to show your adult friends what you believed, but also to inspire children who are growing up in a pious household.
Now, your favorite in the case, tell us about that with the angel.
Oh, my favorite is Abraham and Isaac. And some people may recall reading in the Old Testament, or the Bible, that Abraham was tested by God and was told to sacrifice his son Isaac. And he's obviously not happy about doing it, but he's like, okay, if that's what you want me to do. And this figure captures Abraham with the knife at his child's throat, just as the angel comes and says, no, Abraham, no, because he has already proven that he was a servant to God.
It really is well done.
Oh, I love it.
Absolutely. Now, you also have a series on heroes and villains. Tell me about that.
We do. People were interested in ancient heroes as well as in more contemporary heroes. A lot of times they would learn about them through newspaper stories, just like we do today. And the illustrations that might be in the newspaper story were used as designs to be copied, sometimes for three-dimensional figures, like in this collection. We have one piece that is a figure of a building, and it says Potash Farm on it. And it was part of a series that was made. There were other buildings as well, and a few figures of humans. And this was about a man who was a tenant on a farm, and he decides, hey, I want to own this farm. I want it to be mine, and I'm sick of having to pay any money. Wow. So he murders the landlord.
Wow.
And also murders one of the members of the family, and then forges a document saying that the whole farm was given to him. And the police find out, they chase him, and he eventually is hung. But it was very widely publicized in a whole series of articles, and a very famous and infamous story to follow.
Yeah, I would think that the people that would own these would know how to read because they'd have money. But I mean, this is a great way to tell a story to someone who maybe doesn't know how to read.
It's true. Although, we think today that there was, many people will say that folks were not literate in the period, but they were pretty literate, especially the middle class and wealthy, but even the less wealthy members of society, most of them could read on some level. These kinds of figures might not have been acquired by people who were not literate. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Well, you know, a lot of people were reading, and therefore a lot of characters from books are represented here, and we're going to look at those when we return.
Hi, I'm Debbie Buxton, the Executive Director of the Historic Odessa Foundation. Discover our collections on the 302.
Welcome back. We're at Winterthur, and we're talking about the Staffordshire collection of collectibles. Now, Leslie, I know you have a favorite in the classical portion of this exhibit, and it's really intriguing.
Thank you, I do. I find it just a darling little object. And it is referring to the story of Romulus and Remus, an ancient story. Some people may know that Rome is named for Romulus. But there was an ancient king who was well loved by his people, and his brother is envious of the kingdom, so he has the king murdered. And he is worried that the children of the king will come back and murder him and take back the kingdom. So he imprisons the daughter. The daughter is, even though she's locked away, she gets pregnant somehow anyway, and she has 2 twin boys. The king is very upset about this, very worried, and sends some servants to go and kill all 3 of them. The servants can't bear to kill the children, and they take them in a basket and they leave them beside a river. The river floods, picks up the basket floats down and gets caught in some reeds, and a wolf sees them. The wolf takes them home and suckles them and feeds them until they get a little bit older, and then I think a farmer and his wife find the children and raise them again.
That really is an amazing story, and it's really captured very well in the figure itself.
And everybody, wealthy, not wealthy, poor people would be discussing the same story, whether or not they were reading it. But these were popular stories that would be told over time.
Now in the middle is Bacchus and Arachne, is that right?
Bacchus and Ariadne.
Ariadne.
And no one has ever been able to say that name right. Yeah, Bacchus and Ariadne, that's another one of those large, difficult to make figures, and it's even more complex having 2 different figures next to each other.
Absolutely.
But Bacchus is the taller figure, a man, and he was the god of wine, and he also was quite romantic. And he's with his girlfriend, Ariadne. And this is a couple that many people would recognize when they saw them. But they may not have known in the early 18th century, right around 1800 when these were made, they may not have been aware that the design for this particular sculpture is from deep antiquity. And the figures that originally were represented were figures that were really much more representative of sex rather than just romance and affection.
Speaking of scandal, back in the day, people might not have thought anything about it if they were to purchase Uncle Tom's Cabin because it was part of literature. So can you talk to us a little bit about, you know, just the thoughtfulness that goes into displaying a piece like this in its context and telling its full story?
Yeah, thank you for asking. Dealing with subjects such as Uncle Tom's Cabin, which in its time was celebrated as encouraging abolition, anti-slavery, but is very problematic in the way it is interpreted and looked at today. So things got by back then that today we don't find acceptable. We do have several figures that are illustrating parts of that story, and we felt it was important to show them because if we don't see objects that represent these issues, we won't speak of them and we might forget.
Absolutely, and the story is heralded as, you know, a story that is a classic.
It is, internationally
even though
its
that
time.
it's problematic, but you also have Shakespeare represented here.
We do. Many educated people would have been aware of Shakespeare and some of his contemporaries as being important in terms of understanding politics in some cases, understanding history, Shakespeare's stories were telling of the different kings of England going back to the Middle Ages, for example. And he was, there were many, many models of him, and they're typically looking at a sculpture of him that's a funerary sculpture that's in Westminster Abbey in Poets' Corner in England. So John Cheer, who I mentioned earlier, made a copy of the Shakespeare figure that is in Westminster Abbey, and then this was copied and shared, and that's what the reproductions were done. Some very elegantly done in porcelain that we spoke of earlier, and some being less and less sophisticated and more affordable by middle class.
What are some of the books the stories by Shakespeare that are represented here?
Here we have Macbeth, we have Hamlet, we have Richard III. There's another wonderful one. Those are, I think, the primary ones that are represented here.
So is this the entire collection, or did you pick the pieces? I mean, how do you pick?
It's really hard, and I do have a study area so I can look at some pieces and show particularly interested guests those objects. But we took a total of 220 objects, and so here we have, I think, about 80 or so.
It really is an amazing collection. Thank you so much for telling us the stories. And you know, I really could sit here and look at these all day because the detail is so amazing and in-depth.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Leslie. We'll be right back. So which figurine was your favorite? I'll give you a hint. Mine is coming up, and he robbed from the rich and gave to the poor. Now, here are some other things you might want to check out in our area. For more information on the Staffordshire Collectible exhibit or any of the exhibits here at Winterthur, visit winterthur.org. That'll do it for this week's episode of The 302. Make sure you follow us on Facebook to get behind-the-scenes content you're just not going to get anywhere else. We're going to leave you now with a beauty shot of a serene pond here on the property. Until next time, I'm Jackie Ferris. Tell them you saw it on The 302.